Welcome to the Current Report podcast. I'm Cece Woods, investigative reporter at thecurrentreport.com. And I have my co host here, Mr. Al Labrada.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes, retired assistant chief at LAPD.
Happily retired.
I don't blame you. I really don't. So, this episode, I would like to talk about a few things. Tell us a little bit about your motivation to write these articles and why we are collaborating in your mind.
Well, that's a good question because that's been asked a lot. Why are you
Yep.
coming forward now? And I
Yep.
think we talked about it in one of the last articles. When you're working in a high level position, especially for a paramilitary organization, I'm not going to go on camera while I'm working there saying, "Hey, this place is fucked up." You, there's a lot of behind the scenes discussions. There's arguments. A lot of times we spoke up and said, "This isn't right. Why are we doing this?" But at the end of the day, you got to follow the orders, and we did, just as I did in the military when I was in the Marine Corps. You got to follow the orders. You don't agree unless they're illegal, unethical, or immoral. You got to move forward and make it happen as best you can. The reason I'm bringing forward a lot of this now is because there's a lot of perception that the mismanagement is occurring under Jim McDonald's, and there's some failure to move the trajectory, if you will, of the path that was initiated way before McDonald got there. And I think it's important for the public to know that it's not the officers' fault. The officers are doing a hard job under very difficult circumstances with little support, not only at the government level, but also within the department. Because you got policies that have been argued for years that we should have gotten rid of or at least amended, such as a complaint policy, other policies that are just archaic. Under Moore, it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of expensive travel, a lot of expensive smoke and mirror trajectory just to really appease the elected and really just for personal benefits. There was no true benefit in any of the things that Mike Moore did other than just self-survival.
So, why did you pick the current report? And we'll get more into what you just talked about because, my motivation, although I was never in law enforcement, my motivation has been to expose corruption. And I got into that because of my relationship with former Sheriff Alex Villanueva. I watched what was going on with the Board of Supervisors and I decided to start the current report. So, what brought us together in your mind?
Well, seeing your reporting, your true reporting. I mean, if you want to compare apples and oranges, you look at what the reporting is so-called, the local LA Times. I mean, they're so one-sided on their narrative. Personally, I fed them information on stories that I wanted to highlight the department years ago to kind of be more proactive and trying to show them the good work that is being done. But somehow they always shifted it to a liability issue of how officers are not doing their job properly. They always tend to shift it for for the public that wants to read that here in Los Angeles. You now you have a socialist type community. You have a community that's very pro-Democrat, and truly they don't want to see positive law enforcement stories. So seeing your highlighting of the reality of what's occurring, not only to the public of the good work the police and sheriff's departments are doing, but also the incompetence and some of the debacles that are occurring within the organizations, in your case, the sheriff's department. But it triggered my mind of all the things that I saw, we try to address, we try to change, we try to, bring up not only at the elected level, but also within the department. And nothing ever changed. We just kind of suppressed it. The chief always just smoke and mirrors, we'll work through it. We'll make it look nice on paper. But the reality, it was causing a lot of friction internally, but also causing a lot of officers to work with their arms tied. They weren't able to do their job effectively with the policies that are still in place. So being able to talk about it openly now, having been retired, is just an eye opener for the public. I think it's important for them to know that a lot of this could have been fixed, and now as we talk about Olympic preparation, we got a couple articles coming out this week. This was long overdue. I raised the red flags years ago in 2020 after the unrest when I was overseeing operations. I said, we're not going to be ready here. There's a lot of upper level command staff that just sits on their hands at headquarters hiding. And the reality is when the flag gets raised, they call on certain individuals to put out fires, and those that remain just go through the motion. And now we have those people still in charge. And you're talking about a major event that's going to pull tens of thousands of officers off the streets for just a regular routine work to police events that they're not ready for, in my opinion.
I'm actually thrilled now that I have you on board at the current report because you get to cover LAPD, whereas I could never cover LAPD. Well, not never, but it wasn't easy for me to cover LAPD because I'm so entrenched in LASD and I understand the command structure and, just I understand that whole world. And now I have you to tell the public about what's going on at LAPD. And uh, because we report facts, we will never have to worry about retractions or takedowns or any of those things. And I have a 15-year blemish free career because I am so focused on documents, evidence, videos, whatever I can do to support the story. And here's another thing that I want to make sure people understand about what you and I are doing at the current report is that it's not necessarily wanting these stories to go viral. It's about forcing change within these departments. And nothing is going to happen if we don't publish these stories and make people aware of what's really going on. Just like you said earlier, a lot of this stuff could have been changed. And guess what? It didn't change. Why? Because it kept getting buried.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with my recent articles on arson and explosives detail at LASD. The three detectives that died almost a year ago, July 18th, will be the 1 year anniversary. That could have been prevented. Those three men did not need to die, one of which just showed up to work and he ended up dead because of it. And that had to do with they did not have the proper supervision. They didn't have the proper supervision on the call. They didn't have the proper supervision that morning. And that is just the beginning, aside from the equipment, aside from all of that other stuff and the captain. And now, hopefully, I believe we are going to be able to see changes within that unit, bringing in Cal OSHA to hold these guys accountable. And so let's talk about your 27th Street explosion articles. Let's
Yeah.
let's get into that for a minute.
Well, I'd like to go back about the sheriff's department.
Okay.
You brought up a good point. I mean,
Thank you.
tragically, you lost three lives, and it was an eye opener for me to not only have conversations with you about what happened there,
Well,
but what was
yeah.
done after the fact. That's a big point. What was done now to ensure that this doesn't happen again? In reality, I think we're kind of, people are just pointing fingers and nothing's really done. And you have a sheriff who has an opportunity to build trust here, not only within his own ranks and saying, hey, we're going to fix this and this will never happen again. And to the public that says, hey, we didn't do right on this thing. We lost three lives. We're going to remember them, but also we're going to make changes to improve this. None of that's happened.
Well, it's even worse than that, believe it or not. Okay. It is way worse because when this thing first happened, I was told by somebody I was very close to on the department, involved in a relationship with, actually. I was told, leave it alone. They read the scan wrong, leave it alone. And I just looked at him and I'm like, okay. So I left it alone because it was just so devastating. And I went to one of the funerals because that's the only one I could make it to. And I'm just watching the widow. They were only married like 8 months and they have small children. And it just so devastating to look at that. Like I'll never forget the look on that woman's face and the grief and the sorrow. Anyway, so a few months go by and I'm just looking into why this one commander was relieved of duty. And I'm just asking questions. So I put a video out. And all of a sudden I start getting information on the second grenade that went missing. How does a second grenade go missing? How does a grenade go missing? Okay. When you pick it up and you put it into evidence, how does it go freaking missing? Okay. So I got to the bottom of that. So by accident, the information drops in my lap. And then I start getting more phone calls. And then I'm like, okay, so this missing grenade never showed up. Luna went, he had a press conference and he said, up, second grenade is missing. How do you have a press conference and tell the public that a grenade is missing? Okay. How do you do that?
Maybe he wanted their help to try to find it.
Right now, there's a second grenade that we're not 100% sure where it's at.
A missing grenade in the midst of a major investigation into the deadly blast that killed 3 veteran detectives. Sheriff Robert Luna says 2 grenades were recovered from a Santa Monica apartment storage unit last Thursday. He says they were x-rayed and believed to be inert, then transferred by arson detectives to be destroyed at the sheriff's training facility. Friday morning, 1 grenade exploded, killing detectives Joshua Kelly Eakland, Victor Lemus, and William Osborne.
I could tell you with clarity from our post-blast examination that we know 1 device exploded. And we have not recovered any evidence from a second device on that scene.
The ATF, which is handling the investigation, says it has searched a radius over 400 feet from the blast site repeatedly and found no device. At this point, authorities don't know where it may be. Investigators are also continuing their search into who owned the grenades, serving several search warrants on a boat and apartment building garage in Marina Del Rey.
This is a fair reminder to the public in general about how the dangers of this. This certainly exemplifies the heroic deeds that these detectives did.
This morning, a solemn scene as family members gathered as the bodies of the detectives were escorted from the coroner's office to a mortuary in Covina. The 3 deputies, with a collective of 74 years with the department, leaving behind 16 children between them. The sheriff promising a full investigation and major policy changes as they work to figure out what went wrong.
We're going to turn this upside down. We're going to look at everything we could. Why? Because we need to know what happened. We owe it to the families. And for God's sake, I never want this to happen again.
Holy shit. I just looked at him like, are you fucking out of your mind? Like, what is wrong with you? Mm-hmm. So I found out what happened to the second grenade. And I verified this through multiple sources. Well,
please don't tell me it was a paperweight on somebody's desk.
No, but they are known to do that with the inert stuff. I contact the ATF and they had no idea. None. So I give them all the information. And now, actually, we are going to find out whether the brass, which includes Luna, knew about this and never told the ATF, because the ATF didn't know in November when I talked to them. Now, we fast forward to just recently, and I've just put out a couple of more articles. These knuckleheads, and I'm talking about command staff at AED, okay? They're still blowing shit up in the parking lot. The parking lot is not the bomb range. And they're blowing shit up in the parking lot to where people are like, I'm scared to go in that parking lot. I mean, personnel is messaging me saying, I'm scared to go in that parking lot. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I just heard of another incident, which I am investigating. So they got $350,000 in fines because of what transpired with the explosion that killed the 3 detectives. Kello should fine them $350,000. Willful neglect, not having the right equipment, and just loads of things. Nothing's changed over there. They're still doing the same shit. Still doing the same shit. So if I don't stay on top of it, and I don't call OSHA, and I don't give them all this information and give it to the ATF, nothing is going to happen. Nothing. So I'm the one who's got to do it, which is really activism. It's not investigative journalism.
And really, that's not a way to honor those 3 detectives that got killed by fixing the
No.
problems. You're just allowing, and it's concerning listening to what you're saying. I mean, the reality of any organization, whether it's law enforcement, military, or even a private corporation, if you had a failure or something catastrophic such as that, you got to make some changes. And going into the 27th Street, like I talked about, I didn't have any oversight of the bomb squad when this occurred. I was actually the bureau chief of Central Bureau, which is Newton Division, where this occurred. So I kind of had to deal with the mess regarding the community, the pretty much the cleanup here, and having our officers monitoring and kind of just trying to rebuild the trust. So I had that part of it. About a year and a half, maybe a year later, I inherited Counterterrorism Bureau when I was promoted to assistant chief, and that was one of my first questions: is what's been accomplished, the changes that we implemented. And I asked for a field day. So I went out to the Ventura County range and had them do a display for me and explain to me how we do detonations and how we do, counter charges and what the weight, because I never attended bomb tech school, and we don't expect us to. Those are why we pay these guys to do that, such as these detectives. But also we have a responsibility as leaders, as the sheriff's department should have done immediately after this, to go to them and say, what do we need to do to make this safer? Where are we going to change detonation procedures? Where are we going to take this for counter detonations, or we have explosives that are unstable? Those are all questions that should have been asked, and changes should have been implemented for the safety of those employees. And it's critical to hear that the sheriff's department has not done that this long later, and they're still blowing shit up in a parking lot. That's very concerning.
Yeah. On top of the fact that I just have another story that I'm working on right now, which is, again, explosives related. Okay. Not arson, explosives related. And we have yet irresponsible transport, etc. It's occurring again. And now, potentially, it could endanger the public. It's not even about the parking lot anymore. It's about endangering the public, because these people who are in command of AED at LASD, the command staff itself clearly has absolutely no clue how to run that unit. The bomb techs, they are fantastic. They are top notch. The supervision still needs to happen, because just like those two detectives that went on the call the night before, Bill Osborne and Josh Kelly Eklund, those two went on the call. They both read the scan wrong. Okay, both of them. One had 6 years, one had 3 years on. They both read it wrong. Now, according to the FBI hazardous devices school, the training, when you see something of that nature, especially grenades, military grade grenades that look like, something is, it looks like it could be live, right? You're supposed to call the military immediately. These guys used an old machine and an older machine, and they read the scan wrong. Now, from what I've been told by sources outside of LASD that are in the bomb community, they told me straight up, I could read it even on an older machine. I can still read it properly if I look at it carefully. Mm-hmm. So clearly, the supervising sergeant that night, who did not show up at the call, who did not check in on them, he could have been that one who said, hey, stop, guys. I think we need to call the military. That is why you have a supervisor, because when two people are wrong, we need an extra set of eyes on it so people don't die.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And apparently the command staff, and I'm talking lieutenant and above, actually sergeant and above, these are the ones that are still actively not doing their jobs properly. So they were brought over from ICIB. ICIB! Like, why would you bring people from ICIB over to AED? Please tell me. Can you explain that to me?
There's no reason to do that. Going back to the 27th Street,
yes,
was similar in what we saw there.
Yes.
It was a lot of complacency. But also, in this case, you had a supervisor that was there that had been promoted out of sitting behind a chief's desk job for 3 years. He hadn't had any supervision experience, but he was a tech. He was a bomb tech for many years prior to that. So I will give him that. His problem is that he had two senior techs that were out there and saying there's too much weight in that device. We cannot, do a counter explosion on this thing because there's too much weight. It was over capacity. He should have stepped in. It's okay. Then we need to weigh it. We need to do this properly. Take our time. We have all the time in the world. And he did. He stepped away and he allowed them to try to sort it out, is what he said, according to the ATF report, and said, "You guys figure it out." And then they figured it out and they blew the neighborhood up. So you have two situations. You have a very complacent, unit where you have supervision that's lackadaisy, that's not asking questions, which is what happened on 27th Street. And then you have, in your situation, from what you're telling me, in the sheriff's department, is you have lack of supervision that has any experience whatsoever in what they're doing, and just kind of probably just crosses his arms and hopes for the best. And, when you have a situation where you have grenades disappearing, obviously there's systems in place where you do, like you said, we call the military, if there's any military grade ordnance, whether we think it's inert or not, you still have to call, because we're not experts in military ordnance, even our bomb techs aren't. But the problem is that you have that lack of supervision and strength and spine, really, for a sergeant or detective in this case, to say, hey, let's stop, time out, let's do this right. And that's kind of what happened in both situations. Sadly, the sheriff's department lost 3 people. We just blew up a neighborhood. That's what we did.
This is so stressful. It's like, God, why is it that hard to put people in place that know what they're fucking doing? I just don't get it. It's just mind blowing.
Well, that's that good old boy mindset that we talk about in some of our articles, and we're going to talk about, relative to the Olympics preparation, because, digging into this Olympics preparation, I knew there was a lot of failures there. I was part of that initially, of the planning. Like I said, in 2020, I raised flags. We created incident management teams to try to prepare our command staff. Even though most of our command staff was saying, "Well, I've got a lot on my plate. I've got too much to do. I really don't want to go out and play on these critical incidents." They don't want to get into experience. They don't see it as a need until things happen, until you have major protests, or you have an earthquake, or you have an Olympics coming up. Then they start trying to play catch up. And that's what they're doing now for the Olympics. They're trying to play catch up, and you got people up there saying, let's shut down academy classes because I think that's going to give us 300 people. Well, 300 people is not going to, it's just a Band-Aid. It's not going to solve the problem for you. It's long overdue. But then, going back into this discussion about what occurred years back, and we had, the chief of police taking, tours and travels to Paris to learn about Olympics, yet he brought nothing back. None of the people that were actually going to be part of the planning team went to Paris. You had reserve officers, and in the article we'll talk a little bit more about that, doing foot beats for optics in Paris. How is that going to help us in preparation for the Olympics here in 2028? It's not. It's not going to help us in any way.
Boy, okay. Well, we're going to have to get deeper into that in our next episode when we release your article, right? There's a couple of parts to it.
Two parts.
2 parts. I cannot get Al to have just one article. It has to be a multi-part series. Okay, so
What do they call it? The rabbit hole. You start digging in some of this research. When I was digging in for this Olympics, I wanted to see all the travel expenditures related to the Olympics. And then I came across this Inspector General's report that talks about all the expense that Information Technology Bureau was traveling to Scotland for a travel trip. Has nothing to do with information technology for the city of LA, but they were in Scotland touring, which is kind of cool. I wish I would have gone to that.
well, there might be some time. You just won't be doing it with LAPD.
No.
So, okay. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you, Al. And I'll see you in a few days.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for joining us. See you next week.